Is your existence valuable? Do you even matter? Let's dive deep into Taoist wisdom to find the answers. We have always been concerned with our own personal worth and value in the world. And the way that we go about thinking about this is completely wrong. We usually measure our own life according to social standards that are very hard to live up to. And we also measure our own lives against those people in society who we believe are successful. And this is a completely wrong way of thinking and going about trying to measure your own value. Because especially in the modern day when we have social media, this is a big problem where people are they are comparing their lives to those famous people, especially that they see on social media, who attract a lot of attention. And just because other people attract a lot of attention, a lot of people think that because they don't have a vast network of popularity, then their life has no value. But this is a completely wrong way of thinking about it. And this is an unnatural perception and actually a cognitive error. And the reason for this is because we see the world as separate, isolated events, which is actually a cognitive error and runs counter to the holistic philosophy of Taoism. To understand why the holistic philosophy of Taoism runs counter to this idea of separate, isolated events that we've all bought into, we have to look into verse 2 of the Tao Te Ching, expounded by the great Taoist Lao-tzu. In verse 2, it states, "When people see some things as beautiful, other things become ugly. When people see some things as good, other things become bad. Being and non-being create each other. Difficult and easy support each other. Long and short define each other. High and low depend on each other. Before and after follow each other. Therefore, the master acts without doing anything and teaches without saying anything. Things arise and she lets them come. Things disappear and she lets them go. She has but doesn't possess, acts but doesn't expect. When her work is done, she forgets it. That is why it lasts forever." So in chapter 2 of the Tao Te Ching, we see that when we define something as beautiful, that automatically makes something ugly. When we make a distinction between high and low, this is the problem. And this is the core of Taoist philosophy. This idea of when we have this partiality in life, we can't see life as it truly is. And this sentiment was actually expressed by Sadhguru in a recent lecture where he was talking about how human beings believe they're the top of the pecking order, but he compared us to ants, saying that, an ant itself has value as well. And without ants in the world, there would be no world. If we take all the insects away, it wouldn't be too long before life itself on this planet would die. But we have this notion that we are above nature and above other creatures, and we don't realize that we are actually part of everything else, but not a lord or a tyrant over everything else. And a lot of religions expound this idea of man versus nature, but a lot of the Eastern traditions appreciate that a human being is actually just part of the cosmos. It's not something that is greater than other aspects of the cosmos. And this is very important, especially when we look into the holistic philosophy of Taoism. And this is why there is no high, no low, and the master resolves everything into equality. The master sees everything as intrinsically valuable, and everything has its places and is in its own defined order. And this is what makes life beautiful, because we have this diversity which creates this unity. Everything goes together, just like the air in our lungs go together. There is a mutuality there that gives life. But we often overlook such a simplistic way of looking at the world, such a natural way of looking at the world, because we are seeing the world through a cognitive error. We are seeing the world through separate, isolated events. We think that this world is separate and things are happening of themselves without being dependent on anything else. And this is actually a cognitive error. So part of the cognitive error is we put things on a pedestal, as the Tao Te Ching explains. Once we make something beautiful, automatically we are making something ugly, even though we're not probably intending to do so. But our partiality is creating something that is ugly. So when we put something on a pedestal, we're automatically diminishing something else. And I know that this is hard for you to get your head around, because we're kind of trained to have this sort of favoritism in the world, but this is a cognitive error according to Taoists. So we put things on a pedestal without seeing the interdependence upon a host of causes and conditions to create that reality. In Buddhism, this is the idea of dependent origination, which is a similar belief in Taoism, where everything goes together, everything is dependent on something else. There is no independently isolated event. In reality, everything goes together as one, as opposed to having a world of duality. As a result, our values are distorted by seeing the world through this cognitive error. To explain this interdependence and intrinsic value, Taoism use a clever analogy using a cup and a house. And this is Lao-tzu's value system, which is actually polar opposite to what humanity find valuable. This cup and house analogy gives us a different perspective of what is valuable in life and how things are actually interdependent. So when we look at the cup analogy, what is valuable about a cup? Ask yourself that question. What is valuable about a cup? Most people will say the cup itself, but we are forgetting the space within the cup. If we don't have the space within the cup, how could we consume a tasty beverage? And likewise with a house, what is more valuable, the walls of the house or the space within the house? Now we could say that the intrinsic value is the space, because without the space we could not have life in the house, or as I said before, we could not consume a tasty beverage with the cup. And this also goes for our mind. That's why this analogy is important. Because when we're constantly filling a cup, for example, if the cup starts to overflow, the cup is useless. Likewise with us, if we're constantly filling our mind full of information and sensory input, then our mind cup is full and we have no use. So this is why it is important to cultivate space within your mind, because if you cultivate space within your mind, according to Taoism, that's where the Tao begins to gravitate towards. The Tao moves to that which is empty, not that which is full. And when the Tao begins to move to that which is empty, you begin to live a life full of wonder and potential, because the Tao is moving to that which is empty and enlightening your life to be everything that you should be and will be if you continue to empty your mind through spiritual cultivation. But that's getting off the track a little bit, but that's part of the house and cup analogy. So keep in mind that when you're constantly overflowing your mind cup, this leads to dis-ease in our life, and that dis-ease can be stress, anxiety, depression, so forth and so on. But sticking with this idea of interdependence and value, we can't just say that the intrinsic value of a cup is the space. We actually need the cup as well to create the life that it gives. So there is an intrinsic interdependence with both aspects. So you have this mutuality that creates something that is useful. And this is the core of Taoist impartiality, about having an impartial perspective, that everything has an intrinsic value but is also interdependent. And this is what creates life, this interdependence and this idea of intrinsic value within everything, which is contributing to creating the world that we live in. And this is often overlooked in our modern world because of this persistent cognitive error of separate isolated events. To understand more about interdependence and intrinsic value, we need to dive deeper into Taoist philosophy and understand some of the core principles within the great tradition. One of the core principles is the idea of shangsheng. Now, this shangsheng is translated as mutual arising. Now, what this means is that there is a mutuality in the world. So mutual arising, there is this, not that something arises on its own, but this idea of mutual arising, this idea of interdependence, this idea that is very similar to dependent origination in Buddhism. Now, this kind of answers the question, the old question of what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Well, according to the Taoists, it's shangsheng, it's mutually arising. And this leads into one of the great Eastern parables, one of the great Eastern phrases that I love to tell people about. And it goes something like this: the universe produces consciousness, and consciousness evokes the universe. Now, that is one of the greatest phrases I've ever heard in my life, because it kind of gives you an answer as to sort of what is happening in this universe. What is consciousness? What is the world of matter? What the hell are we doing here? So, the universe produces consciousness, and consciousness evokes the universe. And this is the idea of mutual arising, this idea of shangsheng, where we have this mutual arising reality. And that means that reality itself is complementary. We have this idea of interdependence. And this leads into the second core principle, which is yin, mutual resonance and interdependence. So Taoism here are trying to give you kind of a philosophical framework as to what is happening within the universe. And these first two are kind of lending towards that. Shangsheng, which is the mutual arising, creating this complementary and mutual reality, leads into yin, which is mutual resonance and interdependence. And so what does this mean? So yin is this result of coming into harmony with the Tao, coming back into resonance or alignment with the Tao. And so how do we do that? How do we come back into harmony with the Tao? Well, we have to follow our own intrinsic nature, Li in Chinese. Now, Li can be translated as the markings in jade, the grain in wood, or the fiber in muscle. Now, what this actually means when we look at those translations is it means an organic pattern. There is an organic pattern in life. This is the best translation. And what this means is that within the mineral, animal, plant, and human kingdoms, there is an organic pattern within all, which actually creates this life. Each and every organism has its own Li, its own organic pattern. So there is an organic pattern of Li within everything. And the organic pattern of Li within the ecosystem is actually the same intelligence that we find in our own nerves, senses, and cognitive functions and psychology. That's how the organic pattern of Li exists within a human being. Each of us have our own Li, and that's what makes us unique in a sense. We have our own intrinsic value, which contributes to the world. Now, we can use myself as an example. I'm a writer. Maybe writing is my Li. Maybe it's not, but maybe it could be. Maybe writing is my Li, which contributes to, a better world, hopefully. And it is by following your Li that you harmonize with the Tao, Yin, mutual resonance and interdependence. By following your Li, you harmonize with the Tao. So when you develop that organic pattern, you begin to experience Yin and harmonize with the Tao. Now, this is very important, especially if you want to contribute to the world and also express your value and your worth, which we all have. By following your Li is how you actually inspire the world, because you're unleashing your virtue, De. Now, De can be translated, this is another core principle in Taoism, and it can be translated as virtue or power or even charismatic power. So when you follow your Li and you begin to experience Yin, then the De comes forward, your virtue comes forward, and you inspire the world through whatever you do. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be glamorous. Remember, there's no high or low. We all have a place here. We all have value. And just because someone gets paid more or is more famous, doesn't mean that they're more valuable than you are. And in some sense, a lot of those people that you look up to are far more insecure than yourself. And an important thing to remember is Li is not something that you can just create. I want to be a writer and I will be a writer. You can do that, but in Taoism, it's always about following what is natural. What comes to you naturally? Do you feel a sense of resonance and a familiarity with music, for example? Maybe that's your Li. Maybe you should follow that path. It comes to you naturally, where something just clicks, like, I really enjoy doing this. This is what I want to be doing. Instead of chasing these empty goals that give fame and fortune, it's better off to follow your own Li. So by following your own Li, you're not falling into the idea of partiality. You're just following the way of nature, because partiality will drive you in all sorts of directions. I want to be rich. I want to be famous. I want to be like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I want to be like all of these famous people. This is just partiality. Li is about following what is natural to you. And that is where the De resides. That's where the real virtue and power can emanate from you. But to achieve any of this, we have to correct our cognitive error to see the world as it truly is. And this reminds me of one of the great quotes from Zhuangzi, where he explains how he sees the infinite in all things, how he sees the world as it truly is, beyond partiality. Zhuangzi says, when there is no more separation between this and that, it is called the still point of the Tao. At the still point in the center of the circle, one can see the infinite in all things. So the ability of Zhuangzi to see the infinite in all things is basically the result of him cleansing the notion of separate isolated events from his mind, the idea of partiality, so he can actually see the impartial reality that is ever present in front of us, but we often miss it because of this persistent cognitive error. But Zhuangzi had done the spiritual work on himself to see the nature of reality as it truly is. And he understood that a partial mind cannot harmonize with the Tao. It's impossible to harmonize with the Tao with the sense of partiality of me versus everything else. This is not going to work. You're not going to harmonize with the Tao by doing that. Actually, according to Zhuangzi, this idea of partiality is a human flaw. This idea of seeing the world as separate isolated events or separate entities is a human flaw. And Zhuangzi explains this through the Chinese word Ching, which actually means species-specific essence. And each species has a specific essence. It's what makes it amazing. But he said that our species-specific essence is a flaw. And why he says that is because that we have the ability to discern, but the thing is that we discern between this and that, good and bad, right and wrong, man, woman, black, white, so forth and so on. So Zhuangzi said this is a human flaw because this keeps you away from the actual intrinsic value and interdependence of reality, because we're seeing the world from a partial perspective, and this is a human flaw. And this is actually also explained in Hindu thought as well through the concept of Maya, illusion. Maya, actually, the root of Maya comes from the root Sanskrit martar, which means measurement, and this means to measure reality. And so Maya and Ching are basically the same thing. When we measure reality, we live in an illusion. That's the fact of the matter. And when we discern between this and that, we can't see reality as it truly is. And this is why Zhuangzi said it's a human flaw, and why in Hindu thought they have the concept of Maya, of the illusion of reality. They're not talking about the build-up of energy and atoms creating this physical form. That can be translated that way, but it's mainly a translation to understand that when you start to discern between this and that this is what builds an illusionary reality, because it divorces you from everything else, creating this illusion of a separate, isolated ego. And this is a common principle among all Eastern traditions. In Hindu thought, actually, there is the philosophy of neti neti, not this, not this. Now, a lot of people say that it means not this, not this, not the body. It can mean that, but it also means not this, not this. It's a way of training yourself. It's a mind training where when you are constantly discerning between this and that, you're saying to yourself, not this, not this. This is not right. I'm seeing the world through an illusion. That's not true. That's not true. I need to see the infinite in all things. And we see this constant practice of mindfulness, of watching your bad habit of discerning and cutting up the world with your intellect. We see this training within the Buddhist tradition, the Jainist tradition, all of the schools of Hindu thought, and also Taoism, through especially Lao-tzu and Zhuangzi. And so you're probably asking, what do we do to heal ourselves from this partiality? How do we heal our mind from seeing the world as this and that? Because this is where all the problems in the world arise, when we have, as Lao-tzu said in the Tao Te Ching, when we have high and low, or when we value something as beautiful, then we diminish something else. This is a big problem which creates a lot of conflict in the world and a lot of hypnosis within our minds. So what do? Well, the fact of the matter is we need to engage in deep spiritual practice. There's no other way around this. You can say what you want. You can wax lyrical on numerous philosophies to try and heal this problem, but that will help, but it won't heal it. You need to engage in deep spiritual practice. Simply, you need to practice viveka. You need to practice this ability to discern within your mind what is real and what is not. You have to really discern that. You have to observe your mind constantly and make sure that you're not peddling to these illusions that you have been unconsciously living your whole life. And viveka is very simple. It's just the observation of your own mind. And there are a ton of other practices that I can mention. But first of all, you have to be aware of the reality that you are cutting the world up according to your own beliefs and your own indoctrination. So this is first and foremost, to be observant of your own mind. And you also have to stop feeding your mind a lot of useless trash. And what I mean by useless trash is stop feeding your mind the idea of this and that, and stop being attracted to that. Stop looking at the social media feeds and comparing people's lives and liking this and disliking that and commenting on this or trolling someone. Get out of this bad habit. This is killing you. This is destroying your mind and destroying the potential and the intrinsic value that you have deep within yourself that we are waiting to see in the world. Stop this bad habit. Get rid of these bad tendencies and stop comparing everything to everything else. Try to see the infinite in all things and see the world as it truly is. You cannot see the world as it truly is by comparing everything. So we should never envy or be jealous of anybody else, because everybody in the end has value. That's what we need to remember. Everybody in the end has value. It's just different. A lot of people say, I wish I was blessed with a big body, an athletic body. I wish I had a professor's mind or a genius's mind. I wish I had a mind of Einstein, for example. And this is just ridiculous thinking. You all have value. Stop envying and being jealous of other people. Get out of this cult of comparison. No one is better than anybody else. We all have value when we see the world correctly. The standards that we all created in the world, such as fame, wealth, and status, are actually an illusion. It's just something that we've made up in this whole attention and attraction economy that we think that we live in. What you need to do is you actually need to just find your own lane. Find your own lane. Everyone is different. Look, for example, if someone's more popular than you, so be it. Even the most famous person you can think of, there's probably someone more well-known than them out there. Does that irk them? Who knows? We don't know them personally. But the psychology behind it says that they probably do, because we're always envying someone else. and their accomplishments, and this is the wrong way to go about it. Find your own lane. Stop looking at everybody else. And what I mean by this is follow your own organic pattern, Li. Follow that to the nth degree and just see where it goes. Because this is your own intrinsic value that you have to give to the world. You're never going to bring anything to the world by comparing your life to someone else and trying to mimic them. This is an illusion. So what you need to do is purify your heart of all of these desires of being somebody that you're not. And this is where you will begin to inspire the world. When you cease to measure things in your own mind as more important than anything else, then you'll begin to see that everything has value and is important in its own right. Without the insects, for example, as Sadhguru mentioned in his lecture, there would be no life. We could just take the insects away and a few days later, life on this planet would be over. Everything has its place, everything has its value, everything has its own intrinsic value, which is part of the interdependence of the whole world. And we need to realize that you are no greater than an ant or the air that we breathe. You're a human being that is part of the world. You're here to express your own humanity, which is different to an ant. An ant is doing its own thing. So, we don't need to compare and measure ourselves against anything else. So it is a mistake to assume insects or anything else are less important than we are. We all go together to create this wonderful life. And so to believe that something is more valuable than something else is just illogical. We all have value, but we just don't know that because we've leaned into a cognitive error that is an illusion. When we begin to cleanse this partiality from our mind to see intrinsic value, then and only then will we begin to see the infinite in all things. And to keep your mind pristine, you know what to do. Subscribe to my channel. Did you like that little segue? Anyway, I hope you subscribed. All jokes aside, I hope you subscribed, and I hope you got a lot out of this episode. And please like the video and leave a comment below to share your thoughts on this episode. And also make sure you turn on the bell notification to be reminded of when my next episode or video is up on my channel. And I hope you enjoyed everything you heard today. And contemplate this deeply. Remember, you do have value. It doesn't matter what anyone says. It doesn't matter how famous or how wealthy you are. You do have value, and you are important, like everything else is important in this world, because together, whether you believe it or not, we are one. Shanti, shanti, shanti.